Hi everyone, Onna here, dropping in to let you know that this episode includes content related to interpersonal violence that may be disturbing to some listeners. Take good care.
Hi everybody, I'm Dustin.
I'm Onna, and we are not qualified to investigate the paranormal, but we might be more qualified than...
A jury of your peers.
Dun dun. I kept trying to think of the sound from Law and Order.
Dun dun.
Dun,
Yeah,
dun, dun,
the gavel.
dun.
Hi everybody, welcome back. If this is your first time tuning in, then welcome in. Tuning in, streaming in, listening in.
Listening.
I'm done. I'm done trying to not be an old man about this. Thank you everybody for listening in. We've got a great one for you today, but I do just want to do some house cleaning real quick. We have noticed that we have quite a few listeners from all over the world. Yay. And we would love to hear from all of you. A lot of our stories are US centric, and we'd love to do some stories that are not, that are from around the world. We've mentioned the UK, we mentioned Australia a couple of times, but if you're listening in from someplace other than the United States, and I know that you are out there, because every time you download something, we see who you... No, we don't know who you are, but we do have some demographics. So we'd love to hear from you. Stories at paranormaloutsiders.com. Please send us an email. Check us out on Twitter. I will put our Twitter tag. I think that's what it's called on Twitter. Handle? I don't know what it's called. It doesn't matter. Twitter is for some other people, but it's a great way to keep in contact, and we'd love to hear from you on Twitter as well. But anyway, the story that we're telling tonight, this is possibly the longest story we've told. It's definitely the oldest story we've told. And I don't know if you've noticed, Anna, but I have a lowball glass.
You sure do.
Full of whiskey.
Oh boy.
In front of me. And I have not taken one sip out of it yet.
Is that a challenge?
I don't think it's a challenge. I think it's...
an invitation.
An incentive.
For me.
No, I think for me,
okay.
This story is very long. I've broken it up into 4 separate parts. I say it's really long. I'm going to get done reading it, and then we're going to look back, and it's going to be like 3 minutes of me telling it. That's going to be it. I do need a little bit of it to get me into some characters that we're going to be playing. I'm sorry, that I'm going to be playing. I'm saying we, like the
like,
royal we.
Improv?
Yeah, we got improv going on. The royal we are going to be playing. And I have to switch back and forth a little bit, but I think the whiskey's going to help with it. And then afterwards, I'm just going to need it.
This sounds like it's entertainment coming my way.
This is some entertainment coming your way. Again, the oldest story, the longest story, and the story that I will need some whiskey for. No response.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not going to critique your method or your technique. You do your thing.
You can comment on it. You don't have to necessarily like say something negative or critique it, but
I'm ready.
You could just be like, good.
I'm ready.
Okay, and I'm ready to tell the story.
Tell me a long story.
This first part is called The Beginning. In the small town of Greenbrier, West Virginia, lived a young woman named Elizabeth Zona Hester. By the way, there are lots of really long names in here, especially the name of the male person in the story. I'm just going to call them by their nicknames. So from now on, Elizabeth Zona Hester is Zona.
Is that what her nickname, or you made it up?
That's her nickname.
Okay.
I'm not making nicknames up for people. What?
My last story, they were completely fabricated names in the story. So.
Okay. Well, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I've done that in other stories, but not for this one because I think it's so old I don't feel so bad.
Sounds more historical what you're about to tell me. Yeah.
Despite being somewhat of an oddity of the times, Zona was known for her kind heart and resilience. She was beloved by all who knew her. The townspeople often spoke of her warm, radiant smile that seemed to bring light to even the darkest of days. In the autumn of 1896, Zona met a handsome blacksmith named Erasmus Stribling Trout Shoe. Nope, I didn't make that up, and from now on he's Trout, because Erasmus? Erasmus.
Stribling?
I think I'm pronouncing that right. Stribbling, right?
That sounds right. I'm sorry. I'm very, very sorry, Erasmus, for laughing at your name.
Well, don't apologize to him.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Speaking of which, I'm going to take a sip of whiskey real quick. Erasmus Stribling Trout Shoe. See, that's why I needed the whiskey. Who had recently moved to Greenbrier and worked as a blacksmith. The two fell deeply in love, and despite Zona's mother's reservations, they were married within a few months. Their life together appeared to be picture perfect, filled with love and happiness. However, the joy would not last. One morning, Trout needed help with his farm chores and sought the assistance of young Andy Jones. Trout walked the short distance to their neighbor's house and knocked on the Joneses' door. Mrs. Jones answered. "Good morning, Mr. Shue. What brings you here?" "Good morning, Miss Jones. I was wondering if Andy could help me with some chores today. I have urgent business and won't be able to tend my farm," Trout replied. "Certainly, Mr. Shue. Andy will be happy to help," Miss Jones agreed. Before leaving, Trout instructed Andy, "First, check on my wife, Zona, and then you can proceed with the farm chores."
I just feel like I'm there. You just got me.
The whiskey, I told you the whiskey was going to help. Andy nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll make sure everything's in order." I'm trying to do a West Virginia accent. I don't know how well I'm doing. West Virginians, I apologize. Please don't. It was in the late 1800s, so
who knows?
Everybody probably sounded like that. As Andy approached the house, he could sense that something was amiss. The quiet and stillness that surrounded the home sent a shiver down his spine. As he entered, he found Zona's lifeless body lying at the foot of the stairs. In shock, Andy ran back to his own home and told his mother what he had discovered. The news spread rapidly throughout the town, and the community reeled from the sudden and unexplained death of the young woman they had come to love.
Who found the body? Sorry, repeat just that last one.
Andy, the neighbor boy who was going to do the chores.
Thank you. Simple name. I appreciate that.
Yeah, not Andy Striblin Erasmus Fishman Duder. As word spread throughout the town, members of the community began to show up to see if there was anything they could do, as well as to view the spectacle. Trout got to the house first and was displaying some peculiar behavior. He refused to let anyone near Zona's body, guarding it closely. Trout went so far as to dress the body himself, placing a high-necked dress with a stiff collar around the neck and wrapping a veil around her face. He even placed a pillow on one side of her head and rolled up sheet on the other, claiming it would help her rest more comfortably. Sounds kind of like a man in the morning, right? Dr. Knapp arrived to examine Zona's body.
He doesn't have a first name?
He does.
Oh. We're getting full names here.
Dr. Knapp arrived to examine Zona's body, but Trout's constant interference and strange behavior prevented a thorough investigation. Eventually, Trout let the doctor conduct a brief and somewhat cursory examination of Zona's body and concurred with Trout's account, declaring her death an accident caused by everlasting faint. The townspeople mourned Zona's tragic end, but her mother, Mary Jane Hester, could not shake the feeling that her daughter's death was anything but accidental. Mm-hmm. And that's the end of the first part of the story. Thoughts?
How old was Zona?
I think she was like 22, 23. She was young, and I said she was somewhat of an oddity. I think she had a child already.
Okay.
But it's weird, like you look up different versions of the story. Some versions mention that, some versions don't. It's hard to confirm. I didn't do an ancestry look on these people, so like 1890s, it's hard to find like that real...
Like, I don't think it would be super unusual to have a child at that age if you were married.
Right.
But a child out of wedlock would be
right.
Scandalous.
I do have some direct quotes in here that I think they pulled from court records, but we'll get into that because we haven't even mentioned the court. That's it for that. And it's fine if that's, you don't have to say anything because you don't quite know what's going to happen next. But
the only thing I'm wondering is how unusual is the man's behavior? If they they were dating, or we don't know.
They were married.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, they had gotten married.
Mm-hmm. Okay, courting would have been
So, and the doctor's first, what's the word? Diagnosis? Is that like a cause of death? Is that a diagnosis?
Everlasting faint?
Oh yeah, we need to go. Oh, do you want to talk about that?
I do. That was my next question.
I think everlasting faint is a heart attack from what I've been able to read.
Yeah, I'm not a medical historian by any stretch of the imagination. I've never heard of that.
And eventually, I don't remember if I mentioned this or not in the story. I think I do. Eventually, the doctor changes his story to she was pregnant and complications of pregnancy, and she fell down the stairs.
The doctor changed his story?
Yeah. The doctor changes. Again, I don't know if it's called, what is it called? Prognosis? The person's dead. I don't know what it's called.
Oh, cause of death.
Cause of death. Yeah. So I asked that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you.
That's what I was asking.
I thought you were saying, was that a real cause of death? Not what's the term?
No.
Cause of death.
No, I know everlasting faint. I had to research that because I had no idea what the hell it was. Uh-huh. It's like a coma or something like that. I don't know. I think it was just a catch-all for like, she fell. Yeah,
interesting.
Like, but I think if you even had like an aneurysm, like they would be like, oh, it's the everlasting faint.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm still doing my my southern accent for stuff like that. Sorry about that.
I like it.
But I just took another sip because we're about to go into the second part of this story. Mm-hmm. And this part is titled The Lawyer.
The Lawyer.
Are you ready to hear the story of the lawyer? Part 2, The Lawyer. Weeks after Zona's funeral, the winter air was bitterly cold and the snow crunched underfoot of Mary Jane Hester as she made her way to the office of a local lawyer, John Alfred Preston. She had an appointment to discuss the recent mysterious death of her daughter. I'm already doing it. Of her daughter, Elva Zona Hester Shue, better known as Zona. Zona had been found dead in her home, and the local doctor, Dr. George W. Knapp, I did have it in here,
okay,
had quickly ruled her death to be caused by everlasting faint, or childbirth complications, despite not conducting a thorough examination. As Mary Jane entered the lawyer's office, her face was drawn and pale. She had lost weight since Zona's death, and her once sparkling eyes were now filled with a sorrowful, haunted look. "Mr. Preston," she began, "I need your help. I believe my daughter was murdered by her husband, Trout Striblin Shue."
I'm assuming he didn't laugh at her.
No.
Murdered by who?
I didn't even finish the sentence. "And I need to prove it." So she has to prove it. Okay. I'll forget that. Preston, a man of medium build with dark hair and a neatly trimmed mustache, looked at her skeptically. "Mrs. Hester," he replied, "I understand your grief, but Dr. Knapp has already declared her death to be of natural causes. She was pregnant and not well. What makes you believe she was murdered?" Mary Jane hesitated, unsure of how her story would be received, but she knew she had to tell it. "4 weeks ago, after Zona's death, her spirit came to me. She visited me on 4
As Mary Jane
told her story, Preston's mind was transported into it. The walls of his office faded away, and he found himself able to imagine the place and setting of Mary Jane's tale. And now we're on to the third part. Mm-hmm. So now we know that we're going to hear the story.
Mm-hmm. I just want to know more.
Okay.
I want to know Mary
No,
Jane's story.
Yeah. So our third part here is called The Ghost. As days turned into weeks after Zona's death, Mary struggled to come to terms with her loss, feeling as if a piece of her heart had been torn away. Little did she know that her life was about to take an unexpected and eerie turn. One night, Mary Jane was lying in bed, unable to find sleep. The room was dark, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the window. Suddenly, she felt a presence in the room. A strange energy that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw a figure standing at the foot of her bed. The ghostly apparition was Zona, her daughter, with a sorrowful expression on her face. Zona stared silently at her mother. "Zona?" Mary asked slowly. Zona didn't answer. She just stared at her mother without saying a word. Mary was frozen with fear. As she was just getting up the courage to call out for her daughter once again, Zona's head began to move, but not in a normal fashion. Her head slowly began to turn without stopping. As her head turned around completely on her body, her face began to come into view again. Zona made a blood-curdling scream as her neck snapped and her head hung at a 90-degree angle. Mary Jane was so overwhelmed that she fainted and fell into a dreamless sleep.
Wow.
When Mary Jane awoke the next morning, she wasn't quite sure how to take this experience. Was it all a dream? She decided to let it go for now and go about her day as best she could. As the second night approached, Mary Jane tried to put the previous night's experience behind her and prepared for bed, but she soon found it difficult to sleep, and Zora returned. But this time, the specter began to speak. "Mother, I have come to you with the truth. I need your help." Mary Jane, in shock, responded, "Zona, my child, is it truly you? How can this be?" "Yes, Mother, I must tell you what happened." Zona showed her mother the marks on her neck, a testament to the brutality she had suffered. "Zora, I missed you so. I'm so sorry this happened, but what can I do?" "It was Trout, Mama. Trout did this." This time, Zona started to fade away. "Help me, Mama," she cried as she went from translucent to nothingness. Mary Jane vowed to do everything she could to catch this bastard and bring him to justice. But she needed something more, hard evidence to bring to the lawyer. During the third visit, Zona provided more details about her murder and how Trout manipulated the doctor. She revealed the extent of Trout's deception in hiding his crime. Mary Jane, heartbroken and furious, promised her daughter that she would not let let Trout get away with his actions. On the final night, as Zona's spirit began to fade, she made a last plea to her mother. She told her mother that she was the only one she could communicate with, as her attempts to reach out to others have failed. Mary Jane assured Zona that she would not rest until Trout was held accountable for his heinous crimes. With a final expression of love, Zona's spirit vanished, leaving Mary Jane with a renewed sense of purpose. Back at the lawyer's office, Mary had finished telling her account of the past 4 nights and looked up at Preston. The lawyer raised his eyebrows but said nothing. Mary Jane continued, "I know it sounds unbelievable, but I swear it's the truth. I need your help to help me reopen this investigation into Zona's death. We must find justice for her." Preston leaned back in his chair, considering her story. He was a rational man and not prone to believing in ghosts or the supernatural, yet there was something in Mary Jane's eyes. A deep conviction that made him wonder if there could be any truth to her tale. He made a decision. "Mrs. Hester, I cannot promise that I will be able to prove your daughter was murdered, but I will look into the case and see what can be done." Mary Jane's eyes welled up with tears of gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Preston, that's all I ask." With the lawyer's help, they petitioned the local prosecutor to exhume Zona's body and perform a full autopsy. The results of the autopsy were shocking. Zona's neck had indeed been broken, but there were also clear signs of strangulation. The evidence was overwhelming, and Trout was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife.
Wow.
The story's not over yet.
So I think I have heard about this story before. You're doing a much more compelling job telling it than the way that I heard it before.
There's lots of different accounts of it. And
yeah.
And like I said, this is 1890, so there were records.
Yeah.
But they're not great. And plus, like, hurricanes and tornadoes and fires and all kinds of things that happen in the South that cause records to go missing. But there still are direct quotes. The case that's about to happen, so obviously this goes to trial, is unprecedented.
Yeah.
And
since.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll get into
but
that.
you go into that. But
yeah.
Up to this point, I don't think I hadn't heard or remembered the detail of Mary Jane's first night seeing her daughter and her neck breaking. That's really, really disturbing.
Yeah, I editorialized that one a bit, but but I think that from what I understand, like, her neck was moving in kind of a weird fashion, and that's kind of how Mary Jane knew that, like, her neck had been broken. I'm not, I some accounts say that the ghost talked, some accounts say that the ghost didn't talk. It's weird. It's very wishy-washy. I just haven't, I wasn't able to go to the courthouse to look up the records in Greenbrier. Maybe some other time.
Yeah.
But yeah, with what I was able to find, and I'll put my sources in the show notes and make sure that everybody has their, can do their own investigation into this and kind of see. It's a very, very interesting tale and eventually case, which we're going to talk about next. But before we do, anything else?
Well, a couple of things come to my mind. So yeah, the visions of loved ones who recently passed are very, very common.
Really?
Yeah, cross-culturally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Part of the grief process, or we don't know?
We don't know.
Okay.
As far as I know, I am more familiar with, like, supporting people through bereavement and grief and loss than, like, the phenomenon of it. So I've really talked to people through, like, normalizing it, and I haven't worked with anyone who's, like, is questioning whether that was real or not. Like, that's not really the focus of our time together. It's more on, like, making meaning out of it and moving through all the other parts of grief and loss. Yeah, I mean, this is the great question that is unanswerable by science. What happens after we die? So, that's a lot to go into.
Yeah.
As far as the nature of these, I'll use the term visions, but I don't mean to, like, undermine the perceived reality of these things, because, again, science can't answer the question of whether ghosts are real or that the spirits of our loved ones can remain.
Isn't that what we're doing here right now?
Well, okay. So again, from a clinical psychology perspective, my job isn't to question that or like focus on, that doesn't sound like that's real. That's not helpful when someone is grieving.
You don't just, like, tell a patient, like,
no,
hey, there's something wrong with you.
No,
that's not real.
No, and we also wouldn't diagnose it as a delusion or a hallucination, like a visual hallucination. Would never. I mean, I can't say anyone ever would or has not historically, but contemporarily, it would be just considered part of bereavement and grief and loss, and expected to probably become less frequent. It can come in so many forms, like in dream. I've heard of people who've described it at daytime visions of a person that they lost, and again, most of the time, whether that person explains it as, it was comforting comforting to me, or it was probably just a dream, or they are like, they visited me. My job is to help them, again, make sense of it from what it feels like now and how it helps them move through the grief process.
Okay.
And yeah.
So her seeing this apparition wasn't necessarily like unexplainable from what we know of grief.
What we know people who are grieving the loss of loved ones experience. I don't know that it's common enough to say like this will happen when you're grieving, or to say that it has to look like this. Like I said, it can look like many different things, like a person saying, I thought I saw them and, it just really felt really real, or like they were driving a car and I know it wasn't them, but it just, a person who looked like them. So many ways that when you're thinking about a person in the most intense emotional way that you can, you probably will, perceive them in other places in your life, or you'll dream about them. That's probably the most pragmatic explanation, is that your mind is constructing that. And it may be, the function might be to help you grieve. It may just be part of it, or it may just be like, this is what you're thinking about a lot, so you're going to see it or see them. But of course, again, we can't answer the question of like, it's definitely not them. It's not useful to even go down that road, and we can't prove it or disprove it with science. So
well, and in this case,
this is where this case is wild.
Right. In this case, we're talking about it actually going to trial.
Yeah.
So there's going to have to be some testimony, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
And not that science definitely came into play as far as, well, you'll find out. But there is a bit of a distinction, especially in the United States, of science and law. Because whenever you get up there on the stand, what do? The first thing you do is you swear in. And what do you swear on? Whatever your holy book is, right? Usually the Bible.
Yeah.
If you're an atheist, I don't know what you do. I have no idea. Okay. That's making a distinction between like what's considered paranormal and what's considered religion. And I'm not trying to make that distinction here, but I am saying that already within a court, you're already somewhat admitting that there is something else after you die. Right? Because if you're already swearing in on a Bible, and because you believe in God and you believe in heaven and hell, then aren't you already kind of saying like, well, now we believe that these things exist, so...
a court of law, I never really thought about that in terms of like a court of law under God, under this.
Right,
like,
but let's put a pin in that, because we haven't even read the trial part yet.
And I'll have to say, like when I say that these kinds of visions of the loved ones we have lost are common cross-culturally, that's like ancient, thousands of years of, so that doesn't come from psychology. It comes from the Tibetan Book of the Dead is about how to help family, how to help your loved ones' spirits move on, because you will see them, or even if you don't see them, they're around. It's fascinating. It is beautiful. The idea of that, helping your loved ones move on also is helping us grieve.
Absolutely. Okay. So are you ready to hear about the trial?
Absolutely.
That's good, because the next part of this story is labeled The Trial.
These chapter titles are really important.
Yeah, they are. Hey, well, break it up. The townspeople of Greenbrier whispered excitedly about the upcoming trial. It was the talk of the town, a story that had captivated everyone's attention. Trout Chu was accused of the murder of his wife Zona. The case was unlike anything the town had ever seen, as the accusations stemmed from the ghostly visits of the deceased wife to her grieving mother, Mary Jane Hester. The courthouse was packed on the day the trial began, curious onlookers craning their necks for a glimpse of the accused and the mother who had launched the investigation based upon otherworldly revelations. Local lawyer John Preston was appointed as the prosecutor, and despite his initial skepticism, he now stood firm in his pursuit of justice for Zona. The trial commenced with Preston presenting the autopsy findings, which showed evidence of a broken neck and finger-shaped bruises around Zona's throat. The townspeople gasped in horror as the gruesome details were laid bare. Preston then called a series of witnesses to testify about Trout's violent past, revealing his 2 previous marriages, one ending in divorce due to his abusive behavior, and the other in the suspicious death of his wife. While in jail previously, it was reported that Trout had said that he wished to be married 7 times to 7 different women. As far as character witnesses went, this was pretty damning already, but the townspeople and jury were waiting to hear Zona's mother's tale. At this point, everything they had heard about her story was gossip, and they wanted confirmation of what she had seen. Mary Jane Hester took the stand, her voice steady and her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. She recounted the chilling visits from her daughter's ghost, detailing the horrifying truth of Zona's murder at the hands of her husband. Zona's spirit came to me 4 times, revealing the truth about her death. She told me that Trout strangled her in a fit of rage. She couldn't rest until her murderer had faced justice. The defense lawyer, eager to challenge Mary Jane's account, countered, Mrs. Hester, isn't it possible that your grief caused you to imagine or dream these visits from your daughter? Perhaps this is all just a bit of hysteria that you may need to see Dr. Knapp about.
I'm just a Southern lawyer. I don't know.
I don't know what these big city people are talking about ghosts about. So the whiskey's kicking in, and that's kind of why I needed the whiskeys to do that voice specifically. Mary Jane, with unwavering conviction, replied, "It was not a dream. She came and told me that he was mad at her because she had no meat cooked for dinner. But that next night, she told me that her neck was strangled off at the joint, and it was just as she told me." So that was a direct quote, by the way.
Okay, she said...
I guess Trout got mad at her for not having meat in the dinner that she had prepared. Like maybe she just made potatoes or something. Which is like
it's meat
the
free.
reasons for killing your wife or spouse. Like they're just what?
No meat free Mondays back then.
Yeah.
No.
The courtroom hung on every word, her tale of the supernatural both captivating and terrifying. The defense, knowing the significance of Mary Jane's testimony, attempted to discredit her claims by emphasizing the lack of scientific basis for the existence of ghosts. They questioned her mental state, suggesting that grief had caused her to imagine the encounters with her daughter's spirit. However, the jury seemed to be more swayed by Mary Jane's unwavering conviction and the physical evidence that supported her story. Good for them. As the trial continued, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Those in attendance were torn between their rational minds and the deeply emotional testimony of a grieving mother who sought justice for her daughter. Whispers and murmurs filled the room as the people debated the credibility of the ghostly visits. In the end, the jury took 1 hour and 10 minutes to deliberate.
That sounds not very long.
It doesn't.
I think nowadays that's wildly short.
Is it?
I don't know
Okay.
I don't know if it's as short. Like deliberations are longer now than they used to be. Is another way of saying that.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the average time is for that.
I think it's, I don't know.
Maybe we'll look it up.
Yeah.
"Oh, Mr. Presiding Juror," the judge said, "have you and your peers come to a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor. We find the defendant guilty as charged."
Tell me about that juror. I want to hear about that.
Well, first of all, they're all men, right? Because I don't think
Right.
women could be jurors back then.
Right.
And second of all, I was running out of Southern accents to do.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that was good. Was that a Southern accent? That was great.
I'm just
Okay.
imitating you.
All right.
Yeehaw.
The combination of the autopsy findings, the testimony of Trout's violent past, and the haunting story of Zona's ghostly visits to her mother proved to be enough. They returned with a guilty verdict, sentencing Trout Shue to life in prison for the murder of his wife. Trout died of the flu 3 years later, 3 years into his sentence.
Oh.
This trial went down in history to be known as the trial of the Greenbrier Ghost, would go down in history as one of the most unusual and fascinating cases ever seen. It was a tale of love, betrayal, and justice from beyond the grave, a story that would continue to captivate the imagination of generations to come. In the end, a mother's unwavering love and determination had triumphed, bringing closure to the tragic life of Elva Zona Hester Shue. With all of that being said,
Yeah.
it was a very nice ending. However, there are some people who still don't know if this guy was guilty or not.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I can't say that we're... Okay, so...
Okay, real quick, just to close all this out. That is the only known case in U.S. history of the only known U.S. murder trial in history where a ghost testimony was allowed to be submitted as evidence.
Yeah.
That's huge.
And I mean, a ghost testimony kind of makes it sound like they did EVP on the stand or something like that, but like that there was a ghost in the courtroom. It was the alleged accusations from a ghost. Yeah. Does that make sense? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The distinction being that it was like through another person.
So my bourbon is almost fully drunk. I'm feeling very good, and I'm ready to hear more of what you have to say, Dr. Onna.
All right. Well, okay. So I the first thing I think about is these lawyers, if they spent their time. My question is, you said they spent most of their time just their defense was based on the fact that there's no scientific evidence of ghosts being
They
real?
were trying to discredit her testimony. That was the one thing they were trying to discredit her testimony on. I'm sure they had plenty of other stuff like the original testimony of Dr. Knapp
Yeah.
saying that, oh, this was, she had a heart attack or she was pregnant or whatever.
Right.
Now that all ended up kind of falling through, right? Because once they did the full autopsy, they found out that no, she had actually been strangled to death.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they found out if she was pregnant or not. That was something that I think the ghost, quote unquote, told her mother, that Zona told her mother in ghost form, was like, I wasn't pregnant. Like, he lied about that.
Oh.
He just told Dr. Knapp that, and that's why he was like, but a man in grieving, especially after losing somebody with a child, like a woman, your wife who is with child, like, might act like that. So Dr. Knapp was just like, oh, he's just, he's acting a little funny because he just lost his wife and a child, and a potential child. Sorry, that went a little bit on a tangent, but I think there was that. I think it was, there was really no other evidence. Maybe there was like the body had been exhumed in the dead of winter, like things could have changed. Everything that they said about the science, no scientific evidence for ghost, I think was just to discredit Mary Jane.
Okay. Yeah. They're focused on her testimony being
Right.
being the key.
Because again, you had a jury of your peers, sure, but they were all men back then, right? So all they really had to prove, honestly, that no meat in your dinner was enough to murder your wife.
Well, okay, that is surprising to me that her testimony did sway them as much as it did. That the defense wasn't able to discredit her sufficiently for a jury of men in the 1890s to be skeptical of a woman in grief.
Right.
testifying.
And I think that her composure goes to speak volumes about that. I have my own theories about this, but I really think that she was a very well, just like, she was, first of all, an upstanding citizen, right? So like, everybody knew who she was.
Yeah.
That was part of it, right? The other part was, even though she was a grieving mother and she did have some emotion on the stand, she was so consistent with her story. She was, ready to basically bite back at the defense and say, no, I understand. Yes, I am in grieving, but no, this was a visit from my daughter, and she told me she was murdered. Not only did she tell me she was murdered, she told me how. And when we looked at the body, we found exactly what she told us to look for.
Yeah.
So I think that's also I think the ghost was on trial a little bit, or at least the ghost story was on trial. And then finding the evidence that the ghost said you were going to find was there, right? So it was like, oh, yeah, okay, the ghost was right.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether she was in grief or not, that was right?
Yeah.
So whether you found it for the wrong reasons, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Not wrong reasons, but yeah.
So if I'm this guy's defense lawyer, I probably wouldn't be as focused on let's disprove, or let's just continue to go on and on about how ghosts aren't real. But you probably need a more doubt about how she would have that knowledge. Like, how would she? Is there any other way that she might have?
Who she?
I'm sorry. How would Mary Jane have the knowledge about the neck being broken?
Oh, 100%.
That would be my focus on let's drum up some other possible explanations for that are not she got that information from a ghost, and throw some out there. What do you think? I have a couple of thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know how else they could have kind of disproven this. The other character witnesses were terrible too, right? Like, one of his old jailmates was like, he told me he wanted to have 7 wives.
Yeah, so
so
that's
it's
a different route. And
then also he had a past of domestic abuse, and that's obviously what's the best predictor for future behavior?
Past behavior.
Hey,
yeah.
I'm learning from you.
Yeah.
I have my own theories as to Mary Jane's story and how she would have known that Zora was strangled to begin with.
Yeah, that's what I would go down that path, because going down that path leads you to she might have known he was abusive, and even if 100%. she didn't know he was abusive, if they've got testimony about that, if that's character characteristics, that might be a piece. And that's hard for a defense lawyer to say, well, we're going to say she knew that he was abusive, because that doesn't work for the defense.
Yeah.
Right? So you can poke holes in the ghost by saying, oh, there are other ways you knew he was abusive, but then you're still painting him as a possible murderer. Do you see the catch-22 there?
Yeah.
And if you poke holes in how could you have gotten that information from a ghost, you're still agreeing that the autopsy, that she died by her neck being broken.
Right.
And what can the defense do? I feel like they were kind of stuck.
Right. Yeah, no. And
because her neck was broken.
I know. It's almost like the prosecution didn't even need to have Mary Jane take the stand, I mean.
Yeah.
Like they didn't even need her to tell it. But I think they were like, this is only going to strengthen things.
Which is wild because that would not probably work today.
Probably not, but it was the 1890s. So, you know, I don't want to say a highly religious southern state, which again, West Virginia, I'm pretty sure went with the North during the Civil War. So I think they consider themselves a northern state, but still kind of that same, coming from that same Bible Belt area where religion is a big thing. Plus, again, 1890s in the United States.
In the United States, yeah. So for me, I felt like, what would the defense do? You're still painting the picture of him as a murderer. So again, that it almost seems like there's the law part of it, and what would you do to defend, versus as a psychologist, what might be some other explanations for her happening upon what does look like evidence of a murder.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's say that Mary Jane truly believes she saw her daughter, and her daughter told her these details, diving into the psychological possibilities of it actually wasn't a ghost, it was her, you know, it was a dream, or it was a vision, you know, like a waking dream.
Yeah, let's take that total skeptical perspective and what might I think happen from that perspective. Okay, so possible scenario: her daughter was married to an abusive husband, and possibly she knew that he was abusive. And
100%. Sorry,
you have evidence. You
agree
with me?
I agree with you. Sorry.
Yeah. You holding out on me on information. Okay, so possibly she knew her daughter was with an abusive husband, and her daughter dies. And you mentioned the dress that her husband put her in.
Yeah.
The high neck dress. Let's say that's not. Let's say, well, first of all, he didn't even ask her mother to be involved. It doesn't sound like she was asked to be involved in the preparations for the funeral.
Oh no, he tried to keep everybody away. That was another thing. Yeah, I didn't talk about the part of preparing for the funeral. He was kind of the same way.
Yeah.
He took care of all the. He wouldn't let anybody, like when there was the viewing, because he had the viewing. If anybody stood around he stood by the casket the entire time, and he wouldn't let anybody go near it.
Yes.
And like if anybody lingered for too long, he would like dive over the body and start crying, like, you know, acting like he was, or maybe not acting, maybe he was, you know, grieving. I don't want to.
It's pretty difficult. We're going down the road of a true crime podcast here for a little bit, but yeah, that profile of the overly emotive partner is suspicious, especially for men who are socialized to not show as many emotions. Not to say that they can't, but that is something that's like suspicious of the overly emotive and overly protective, like secretive. So anyway, let's that aside. Say you're the mother and you are being, not only was your daughter's husband abusive, you're now being kept from being involved in the funeral process, which is a really difficult thing to be kept from when you're a parent grieving your child and you can't be involved in that. That's really upsetting and disturbing, and also going to probably make you suspicious of your son-in-law on top of that. And let's say, again, go in more detail, what if the dress he chose, she's like, that's not the dress. She never wore anything like that, or that's not the dress that I would have chosen for her, or like, why would he put her in that dress? Maybe that pointed her toward the neck. What happened? What's he covering up? All of these circumstances point to what is he covering up? Her not being allowed in the process, and maybe the dress itself. Maybe those things are in her mind maybe she had some knowledge that he had choked her before. You know, choking is not a out of the blue behavior.
Well, no, he domestically abused his first wife. I think. There's a divorce.
Yeah, and
then he was in jail for something. It might have been domestic abuse, or it might have been, you know, choking somebody or whatever. That might be his thing.
Yeah. But did they have any, I don't know how good forensics were then, of like, how was her neck broken? Was it choking or strangulation?
They could tell that she died by strangulation. I think her
with an object
had been crushed. No, and then there were fingerprint marks on her neck.
Wow.
Yeah.
So pretty.
I said that.
I'm sorry. I constantly miss things. It's for the benefit of the
talking in a southern drawl, so maybe you just didn't understand.
Probably laughing my head off. It's for the benefit of the listener that I ask silly little questions about things I clearly should have heard, just so you guys don't have to listen again. That's why I do that, right? So. And
I'm almost finished with my bourbon, so I'm feeling good.
Anyway. Yeah, all those pieces, that for me is the line of like, she might have suspected murder, she might have suspected strangulation, she might have had a lot of reasons to suspect those things, and then she's also grieving, and it is not unheard of to have visions or dreams of the people that we've lost. So add all of those things up, her mind might have given her these images of her daughter that then confirmed what she'd already suspected about him, and she was right based on the forensic evidence.
Based upon on previous behavior of this man.
Yeah. But what I can say right is still perhaps not beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right,
and so
right.
again, I'm talking about
Yeah.
the psychology side of it. And like here, there
Yeah.
might be reasonable explanations for her experiencing this. And then is that going to hold up in court?
Yeah.
Apparently it did.
It
Yeah.
did. It held up in court. And I actually I did a deep dive into U.S. law and what other supernatural occurrences have swayed juries or just cases, even for civil lawsuits. I found a few. And I was actually going to talk about them on this episode, but I was like, you know what? Some of these are pretty good. Maybe we want to make a complete episode about them. So we'll go back into that and we'll revisit those separately. But while there have been other cases that have used supernatural reasons for a ruling, this is the only murder trial in which, because usually if nowadays, if I got, if somebody got up there and was like, I'm going to tell you about this, this ghost visited me and told me these things, the judge would be like, the jury needs to strike that. Court recorder, erase everything that man just said. Like it would be like, bailiff, please escort this man off the premise. It would be very no nonsense, like,
even if they did that, if the prosecution took the huge chance to put someone like that on the stand, the defense would already have an expert witness ready to refute everything they said, much like they tried in this trial to do. Yeah. And again, a state prosecution at this point probably would not include any of that. In fact, they would interview the person better, probably have a psychologist interview her. And
were there psychologists in the 1890s?
There were not. What we know of as psychologists today. There were psychology, like, I know.
What were they, like wizards, or like what were they called?
The history of psychology is an interesting branch, kind of, because it's so much more academic. So you would have philosophy, like psychology is really rooted more in philosophy. But you definitely had psychiatrists, neurologists, and psychoanalysts, and they were around. For sure.
Okay.
Working in their institutions and doing their thing.
Okay. No, and this is Greenbrier, West Virginia, right? So this is kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Not that there's not universities, that they could have gone to and gotten expert testimony or, someone to analyze the situation as such. But I also think that maybe they thought that this would be such an easy, first of all you have to do is discredit a woman. Okay, check. In the 1890s. And not only that, but you need to discredit a woman grieving. Okay. Yeah. So there's one thing right there. And then you need to discredit a woman who's grieving, who's claiming she's seeing ghosts.
Yeah.
And so I think they probably were very, good old Southern boys who were just like, we're gonna bring this woman down. It's gonna be so easy. We're gonna bring her down. It's gonna be no issues. Like,
and they didn't bring in a psychiatrist or
not that I saw. Again, I couldn't find the court records online, which means you probably just have to go to the court
or
house and you can probably get them.
All it would take is one physician saying she's got hysteria. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Just one person,
right?
But again,
none of that refutes the broken neck, so the jury might have been like, maybe they didn't believe or didn't say we even need the ghost part of the story.
The other weird thing is like the Dr. Nat dude, who they're like, this guy, he said it was this, but I'm pretty sure he's probably the one who did the autopsy too, because like
that's what I was going to ask.
There's only one doctor in this town, right? so it's like,
Had she even been buried? You said exhumed, or
they had to exhume the body.
Exhume,
in the dead of winter too, which in West Virginia isn't super cold, but it's down there.
Still had marks on her neck.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bruises on her neck, finger-shaped bruises on her neck.
Wow.
Which can be done posthumously. There are, because we all watch CSI, so we all know these things, right?
Yeah. There could be a whole other side of the story that was a massive conspiracy against Trout.
Right, against Aramis shuttle face Trout.
Sniveling Trout.
Against Mr. Aramis Trout Shrew.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's another thing is like, we still don't know whether this guy was guilty or not, right? But
he was found guilty by a jury of his peers.
Yes,
so
he was found guilty. Yes.
He was. That is the
law.
law. That is the law.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. What do you think happened?
I don't have okay.
No, put it all aside. It's okay. Like,
I think
nothing you're about to hear is any kind of psychological advice.
Of course not. Yeah.
No.
I mean, it's not even connected to that. But yeah, I think the portrait that I painted of a not just a grieving mother who wants to believe that her daughter was murdered, but who had some reason to believe that. I do think that.
She didn't trust him to begin with. She didn't like him.
Oh, okay.
She didn't. I don't know if you remember that part of the story at the very beginning. I was like, they were married in love, but her mom did not approve of the marriage.
Yeah.
She did not like
Okay,
this guy.
sorry, you did say that piece. So like,
Yeah.
she, well, and that doesn't, why? I want to hear what women weren't talking about in 1890, or were not free.
Yeah.
They were talking, but it was not documented or free to be talked about with anybody other than women. It was the abuse that might have been going on, or why she didn't like him. It might have been he's divorced. It might have been as simple as she didn't like the guy because he's divorced.
Her daughter had a child, according to some accounts. So her daughter was, again, outside. She was, I said she was an oddity.
Yeah,
like I think she was kind of like,
strange.
no. I know it's not strange nowadays, but in the 1890s, for a single,
she was an
woman to have
outsider.
she was an outsider, right?
Yeah, she was
Much like paranormal outsiders.
So maybe she was hoping to be made, the language they might have used, like legitimize her and her son to get married to anyone who would take her.
That's actually one thing that so from some accounts I read, she had a child, and then other accounts I read she didn't. And I almost think that she didn't because they didn't mention it in the court. Like it definitely would have been a thing in court proceedings. Like this woman with her bastard child, like why would you believe her over, Dr. Knapp?
Yeah.
Or whoever they were saying. Like, I almost feel like they would have mentioned that. That would have been a much more prominent part of the story. But I don't know. Like I'm sure you could find out. I did find there's plenty of pictures of Zona and Trout. Erasmus.
Yeah. I go back to, you asked me what happened, and I focused on the accuser, when really the question what happened is
I asked you what you believe.
What happened. I believe happened. And I focused on her, and I think that's so interesting, because that's what we often do, is like, oh, this is why this person accused this other person, but motive for accusing isn't nearly as important for have a motive for murder. So I don't know what his motive. You didn't tell me that there was marital issue.
There were no meat with his potatoes for dinner that evening.
Right, there was the motive.
I don't know if you heard me correctly, Miss Onna. However, in 1890, although that may be a misdemeanor nowadays in 1890 West Virginia, that was a very serious offense.
Yeah, and a history of violence substantiated by more than just one person.
Yeah. No, I think they had 3 or 4 people on there.
So that's
one was one of his old cellmates, which again, I think using criminal testimony, especially back then for like as a character witness, I don't know if that's even allowed anymore.
That's a really interesting point, because I have learned that at least in some states you can't use previous crimes or like anything like that as character defamation of a defendant. It is interesting. It is.
Well, because if they've been released and they're back in society, then they are technically a reformed person, right? So it's a reformed whatever. So it's I
mean, it's interesting. I can see arguments either way, and I've heard cases where I'm like, whoa, because again, as a psychologist, if you brought me in as an expert witness, how am I supposed to then not take a psychosocial history on a person and then give you my input on who they are? That I can't disregard a criminal history.
So talk about that. Let's talk about Trout, not the fish. Let's talk about this guy.
About snibbling trout.
Snibbling trout. True, man. First of all, he told that other inmate he wanted to have 7 wives, right?
Yeah,
Which, whatever, man. The dude wants to play around. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Back then, it's kind of a big deal. He had been divorced once, and then he had, I think the second marriage that they mentioned was the one where he was thrown in prison because he had domestically abused her. What's the proper term for that?
Abused.
He had abused her. So there was abuse. There was, motive that he, was possibly trying to collect.
That's my question. Isn't just I want to have 7 wives. Like, are you trying to be like a Henry VIII kind of situation? Like, what does that mean to this person?
Do you just want to do it with 7 women, and like back then that's how you said it? Like,
or do you want to have a trail of deceased spouses? What's that about? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But he didn't kill the first one. He just divorced her. So
just like Henry VIII.
I'm sure.
I'm
sure he abused her as well. It was like that was just kind of, which was the style at the time. I know it's terrible. I'm really not trying to make light of it or laugh at it, but it's just so evident, I think, in this case that this guy was just so abusive.
That's highly evident.
I think it's evident. Like, I think it's just glaring.
Okay.
And so like taking the character testimony. So real quick, not to butt in, but what I think happened, I don't think Mary Jane saw a ghost at all. I don't think she, for 1 second, believes in ghosts. I think she was an incredibly intelligent woman. And I think she knew that if she went to somebody and just said, I'm pretty sure this guy beat my daughter because he had beaten all these other women, at the time, she would have been disregarded.
That wouldn't have been enough.
So what
That's
she did
wild.
was concocted this story of how she saw this ghost and she knew the composure she had to have. She knew the role she had to play in order to put this asshole behind bars.
Yeah.
And I think I think she played in a good way.
Yeah.
I think she played everyone like a fiddle, and she just knew what women's roles in society were at the time and how she could manipulate and how she could go about and get the job done and get justice.
That's fascinating.
I believe that. I really after reading all these stories, I'm like, she knew what she was doing. She knew she had to go to that lawyer. She knew Dr. Knapp was probably a fucking drunk, right? Like he's in there like, oh, I guess I don't have to look at this body 100%. Do you have any gin in the house? You know, like she probably knew she knew the community. And I think she just knew how to get justice.
That's amazing.
I like to believe that.
I like that would be gosh, that would make a really great screenplay where at the end, and that would be just how it's written, like where at the end she reveals that she made that all up to get the justice that she wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
I think that's a really old English story, like a short story.
Oh, maybe she read. How old is it? Older than this?
That's
Did she read a lot? Did she have
I'm
a
trying
good
to remember
library?
the name of the story. I'll look it up and I'll insert it right here.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, Dustin from the future here again to tell you that the name of the story I was thinking of is a short story by Agatha Christie called The Witness for the Prosecution, first published in 1925. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, welcome back. Anyway.
So that is, and I think that's where socio-historical context is so important.
Yeah.
And thinking about that, that's a very appealing explanation. It speaks to what the jurors needed to hear. And then when you said that her story stayed so consistent.
Yeah.
And I've mentioned this in previous podcasts, but didn't really go into it, how story staying consistent is really important in legal contexts, but it's increasingly becoming not as important in contexts where we understand how memory works.
Yeah.
Where we have a better understanding that memory is fallible, as I've talked about, but that even when things are true, and I will have to look this up and put in the show notes, the psychologist who's studying this, when people are telling their stories over time, he did these long-term interviews and he got interview after interview of people telling their narratives of stories of things they've gone through. They change because when we pull up a narrative, not a story, but like a narrative of something we've been through, it's being influenced by context every time we tell it. So our mood at the time, our associations at the time, and different parts of our brain might like fire, and we paint different pictures each time, not of the like basic facts. That's what he found. Like the basic facts will stay the same, but some details will vary.
That's really interesting because you always see how prosecutors, defenders, they'll always be like, this person's story hasn't changed one bit.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's supposed to lead some credence towards the truth.
That's
that they're telling the truth.
Yeah, and this researcher talks about how
detector.
you actually we might then be putting more credence to people who are really, really good at rehearsing.
Yeah.
And telling a story the same way every time because they've had to memorize it.
Right.
And have eliminated or have really tried to eliminate context. It's like an actor versus a performer. And imagine trying to tell the truth repeatedly about visions you had at night.
Yeah.
Or what, might be dreams.
Seeing your dead daughter in a way that is horrifying.
Yeah.
Right? Like that first night.
Yeah.
And I did editorialize it a little bit, but it's still like, even, in the 1890s, they didn't have horror movies back then.
No.
So like we're kind of desensitized to it. Where it's like, I to give you a little bit of information about myself, I do have nightmares a lot. I don't know if it's more than common or not. I have nightmares probably once. It used to be once every night. It's kind of slowed down as I've gotten a little bit older, but like I'm desensitized to it. I think to us as a society, that's very normalized. But in 1890, for your like dead loved ones to be visiting you and coherently telling you about how they're, that was a big thing. It might have been like a big deal to them. Maybe that was a little bit like going to the movies and watch, obviously the townspeople were showing up, probably like eating popcorn up at the top, craning their neck, like what's going to happen next? And what's this prosecuting attorney going to do? And what's going to happen? They were ready to hear a story, right? And this was a story.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, again, the fact...
We still do that now.
No, I agree.
Gwyneth Paltrow's defense or whatever. Yeah.
It's all a show. But I think back then, this was a show on par with what we would see today. This woman brought this story, and it was so incredible, so amazing, and so captivating that it got everybody in town to go and watch this trial. And everybody, not only that, but everybody to believe her.
Wow.
Which I think is just amazing. I'm like so in awe of this woman from the 1890s.
And
cow.
and even
I'm
if
sitting here trying to like podcast like a bunch of people, like basically retelling her story still.
Yeah.
I'm still talking about her story. We're still talking about it. And I think it's amazing. And it's horrible because it's a presentation of who we are as a society, that she had to do these things in order to get noticed or in order to get enough attention to get justice for her daughter or what she believed happened to her daughter. But how she did it was just so masterful. That's as far as I can go with it. I'm just in awe.
That's great.
Yeah. I love this story.
I
think it was
amazing.
So good.
It is. It's really amazing. You can't replicate this. I'm almost speechless when I think about it because it does touch on so many of those pieces. It touches on the paranormal. It touches on the law. It touches on society and, again, historical context that you had to be there.
Yeah.
You had to be there except for her neck was broken. That's amazing.
No, and this poor young woman had to die.
And that speaks a lot to women, what women's lives were worth and what you could try to get away with. And maybe he had already before.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. So some of the things I sent you to kind of research on, let's talk about women in the 1890s.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how they were treated by society, how they were treated by, let's talk about hysteria, first of all, like hit the term hysteria, where that comes from. And I don't, if you want to talk about that, I'd love to hear it. I think it's important to kind of just maybe we should have done this at the beginning. They set what hysteria is and what,
Well, did they actually accuse her of that?
They did try to discredit her by saying that she was just a grieving woman, right? Okay. And whether...
So a grieving woman is prone to hysterics.
Right.
That might be the kind of thing.
Hysterics, is that a word? Yeah, no, absolutely. And the question then becomes, if it were a man, if it were her father who was like, I saw Zona's ghost, would that have even been a question?
No, they certainly wouldn't have said hysteria. I think a lot of people don't realize that now it's no longer a valid term in psychology. There's no diagnosis of this, or even it's not even used as an adjective to describe anyone's behavior because it was uniquely to describe the psychological dysfunction of a woman is rooted in her biology as a woman, that the uterus must be, if a woman's experiencing something emotionally distressing, it must be because something's wrong with her lady parts, her womb. There was even like wandering womb. And this goes back to ancient Greece. Like this term is hundreds of years. Yeah.
As old as Hippocrates himself.
As old as the patriarchy can even date back to. But so that diagnosis was then later solidified in the books of psychiatry and used frequently for women who and then in this era, women weren't free in all the ways that we might have thought they would be by then.
No, they couldn't vote.
No, they still could not vote in the United States.
In some states, I did look this up because I was curious. In some states, they could run for public office. So I don't know if that means, I don't know what that means, like secretary or mayor, probably not mayor, but
city council. That would
maybe.
Be interesting if you could run for an office that you couldn't vote for yourself in.
In 2 states, I noticed that was passed. So that's not a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot less than 50, or at the time 30, however many we had.
State government is a patchwork, and it has always been, and that is where federal law is important for things like equality. So and something to note that in this era, in most states, being married was a unification, becoming one person, but that one person you were becoming was the husband.
Yeah.
That became an institution of less freedoms, where you could be hospitalized by your husband. You could be, very easily sent to a psychiatric institution, just because the husband requested that you could be. And that we talked a little bit about a really interesting case of Elizabeth Packard, who was admitted to a psychiatric institution simply at the request of her husband because they had differences on religious opinion. And she was freed, but then he imprisoned her in their home and she got a letter out, and then that went to trial. And passerby found this note that she'd thrown out the window: "Help me, my husband's keeping me in prison in the house." And she was freed because they interviewed her and she was clearly of sound mind. And there's also, it's interesting to me that you would even have to find out if you're of sound mind for it to be not okay for your husband to imprison you in the house. Yeah.
What year was this?
This was
2022.
No, it's so laughable. It's terrible. This was around the same era, I believe. I think it was the 1890s also in Illinois. So, and she went on to advocate for psychiatric patients because she met a lot of women who were in the same situation and saw the conditions, experienced those conditions. So, yeah. Okay. Wild history.
Wild history. And
I've used that word wild many times because I'm avoiding the word crazy because it is. I mean, things that just don't make any sense, that just shouldn't be the way they are, have been that way many, many years.
Right. Yeah. And this is one of those things. And I think that Mary Jane could read the tea leaves. Let's just put it that way, to use an older term. And she just knew what she could say in order to get the justice that her daughter needed. And
so again, that's a really interesting
and even if he didn't kill her, he had abused her, and you know what, put him behind bars, and that's that.
Ultimately, he only served 3 years.
Right. Yeah. Which is interesting. He actually died during a pandemic, which was another interesting thing, because we have all been through a pandemic now, so we all know what that means. But in the jail he was in, he actually had died of I don't know if it was the Spanish flu, but I don't think that was 1918, I think. So this would have been a decade or so before. So yeah,
arguably something he might have had a better chance of surviving if he wasn't in prison.
Right. Yeah. Could have gotten a doctor. Not Dr. Knapp though. That guy was, he was like, I guess she's pregnant. I don't know. She has this fainting heart disease or whatever the hell it's called. This guy was just making up terms.
Yeah. So good history to look into. So many stories like this, that not like this in terms of the ghost testimony,
this is the only one. Yeah,
but in terms of women's experiences in America. And
I just thought this one was so cool. I thought it was not that somebody died, obviously. I don't want that, but I think that, the trial that ensued and that it was an acceptable thing to say that the testimony of a ghost was used at a trial to bring a domestic abuser to justice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a perpetrator of domestic abuse. Yeah.
A perpetrator of
domestic violence.
Domestic violence to justice. So
thanks for this story.
Yeah. Yeah. Any last words?
Well, I'm just I'm just flabbergasted.
Apparently, Ms. Onna has a case of the vapors now.
You've taken my breath away, sir.
Well, very good, very good. Well, thank you for tuning in again and I will use that word, tune in, because
here we are.
It is the 1890s. And the radio has just been invented by Alexander Graham Bell.
Here we go, back into your domain.
Actually, I'm sorry, Mr. Marconi, and his fancy radio machine. No, thank you everybody for listening in again. If you have any questions for us, if you want us to look into any of your stories or any stories from your neck of the woods, please reach out to us, stories@paranormaloutsiders.com. Send us an email or on Twitter. It's in the show notes. Check it out. We love to hear from you.
Yeah. Thanks.